Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Uncorked History. I am coming to you from a computer that is not very happy with me right now, so hopefully it will keep going and nothing will go wrong. I was going to advertise this episode by putting the GIF of Brett Kavanaugh saying, "I like beer. I still like beer," and I thought that might send the wrong message. So, but we're going to talk about beer today. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, who will tell us how we're talking about beer tonight. Hi,
All
Jamie.
right. Hi. So we have three guests tonight, and all of them are an expert in beer in some way, shape, or form. So we have Jamal Lemon, who is a Cicerone certified beer server, co-creator of the Wayfarer Study podcast, and he writes for the website Good Beer Hunting. So welcome, Jamal. We also have Brian Alberts, who is a beer historian, which is, probably way cooler than most people's jobs, right? He's also an author for Good Beer Hunting, and he writes for tons of different outlets. And he's also the host of the website brewedculture.org. Hi, Brian. And then we have Dan Baumiller, who is a co-founder of Full Tilt Brewing out of Baltimore, Maryland. And he actually worked with me to turn my book into a beer. So welcome, everyone. What's everyone drinking?
So I am drinking Full Tilt's Pirates of Chesapeake Bay beer, and I'm drinking it out of an Uncorked History pint glass.
Very nice.
I'm all about the branding today. What's everyone else drinking?
I'm not drinking anything at the moment. I try to limit my consumption during the week, but I did have one Imperial Stout from the Guiness brewery here in Baltimore, Maryland. It was a Imperial Spice Stout. I think it was at like 12%. So I think that's good for me.
Sounds good. Dan, it looked like you were perhaps drinking your own beer.
Yeah, I'm drinking out of an ale horn that we did for some Viking beer back in the day. But I'm drinking Jamie's the Pirates of the Chesapeake Bay beer that we did, which is really like a Pilsner. So I'm enjoying it.
Awesome.
And Brian, I think you've been trying like every Oktoberfest beer.
Oh, geez, yeah, I've been outed. No, but more than I should have. I'm coming up on the end of that. I'm trying very hard to empty my fridge with all the Oktoberfest that I got my hands on this year. I'm not having those tonight. What I actually have right now in my glass is a Bale Breaker Fresh Hop IPA. So I'm on the wrong coast to get my hands on the pirate beer or any of that. I'm in Washington State, and Bale Breaker is a brewery out in the country that grows its own hops. And a fresh hop beer means that the hops were taken right from the field, basically into the brewery. They weren't refined or anything like that. And so it's just like this wonderful fresh IPA. I then have a second one for after, but don't judge me just yet. This is Self-Care by Three Magnets out of Olympia, Washington, and it is a non-alcoholic beer that was made with fresh hops as well. So I'm only really having one, but I get to kind of get two for one. So
nice. I am boring tonight. I've been sick the last couple of days, hence the hot mess going on. I have Gatorade, Cool Blue, in case you were wondering.
Cool
Very
Blue,
delicious.
is that the best of the Gatorades?
In my humble opinion, yes, it is my favorite Gatorade.
Is it craft Gatorade?
It is part of the G line.
As long as it's not homebrew Gatorade.
Yeah. That would be bad news bears. Oh, well, how's everyone doing?
Doing great. It's rainy out in Washington as usual, but it hasn't rained long enough to dampen anyone's spirits yet. So doing great.
Excellent. So let's start with you, Brian, then. What is a beer historian? What the heck do you do as a beer historian?
A beer historian is in an employment predicament. That's what a beer historian is. I specialize in beer culture. I am not a brewer by any means. Dan knows that world. I do not. When it comes to the technicals, I have some colleagues who are great at kind of piecing together from scraps of primary sources, what a historical beer would have been like. I focus on culture, politics, society, things like that. And so I specialized in the 19th century for, my doctorate and things and some of my projects since then, but I like to branch out. I like to talk about the United States in particular. I recently did a podcast about the Coors boycotts, which spoke with Allison Brantley, a professor in Southern California, who just put out a really fantastic book about the topic. And I spoke with her to kind of present her history in podcast form. So that was really great. I'm working with Jamal right now to talk about 18th century brewers, 18th century black brewers in Charleston, and a history that has not been told well at all, and that we're trying to remedy that, and everything in between. So.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So Jamal, you are a Cicerone certified beer server. What is that?
That's basically like an introductory level to not quite a beer expert or a Cicerone, certified Cicerone, but it basically gives you a pretty good foundation of a fair amount of knowledge of beer styles, where certain styles originate from, brewing process, beer clean glasses, and things of that nature. So yeah, it's a good, like I said, it's a good introductory level of beer knowledge.
Awesome. How'd you get into that?
Ooh, that is a very long story that I'm not going to bore you guys with. But in 2016, I won a contest, casting call, where they were looking for people who wanted to document their beer experiences, travel around the world and document their beer experiences. Long story short, my buddy and I ended up winning that contest, which was a good experience for me because it really opened my eyes to the craft beer industry. Prior to that, I would drink beer, but I never frequented breweries and things of that nature. But at the end of that experience, I just went all in, to the point where I started applying for breweries. Worked at a brewery down in DC called Atlas. My wife and I moved up to Baltimore, worked at Suspended Brewing, which is also here in Baltimore, and Mobtown. And I have an English background. I have a master's degree in English. So I just kind of like found my niche in writing for Good Beer Hunting, huckberry.com, craftbeer.com, a couple other publications. And I've just been doing that. But that's kind of like, I've been, networking, you meet people, you have beers with them, and you kind of just get pushed in all these different, avenues of like beer and stuff like that. So in like working with Brian and I actually met Brian on a panel discussion that I moderated, which was like another opportunity that I had never moderated a panel of any sort prior to that, but like that was an opportunity, and Brian and I met, and then we full circle meet doing this project about the Schützenfest in Charleston. So yeah.
I definitely want to come back and hear more about that project. But I also want to ask Dan how you got into brewing. I think this is something that sounds super fascinating, but I don't know how people actually get into it as an actual job.
I'll give you the abridged version, just because it's a long story. But it's really pretty much what you would imagine. Like, we really liked beer, and drinking it, just fascinated. You want to understand why you like one beer versus the other. So my cousin, Nick Fertig, he's my co-founder of Full Tilt Brewing. He and I started home brewing. I think that went back to like around 2008. And we were just fascinated with it, just brewed nonstop. Neither of us had really much money to make a splash into the industry. So we, in 2012, we found someone that was opening up a contract brewery that eventually became Peabody Heights, which is also in Baltimore. So we were the second batch that was ever brewed there. We launched in December of 2012, and we were just kind of grinding, scraping away. Like we always seemed way bigger than we were. And we wanted to open up our own brewery, and it just took a long time. It's tough to get money if you don't have it already. So we were able to open up our own spot. Finally, our tap room opened up in December of 2018. So, we're coming up on 3 years, but, half of that's been COVID. So, but here we are, we're doing fun stuff. I mean, at least the pandemic, we were able to stay open. It was rough. not what we opened for, but we were able to do a lot of fun stuff and get our name out there and make some fun beers. And Royale with Cheese was one of the ones we made during the pandemic. That was like the lager that's kind of what Dr. Jamie's beer is has inside of it. So that was fun too. And met cool people like Dr. Jamie. And I remember she sent me her book during the pandemic and just a lot of fun stuff. So yeah, if you look closely, you can't really see it, but I have her book back there. I'm trying to do a little product placement. So.
How many different beers do you brew? I don't know, at one time or over time? I don't know even how to ask the question.
Well, we have we open to be like a tap room, like to mainly just like keep a variety. So a lot of the things we do, we don't even do more than once. So we have 16 rotating lines. So I don't even know totally how many we've ever done, but we only have 4 fermenters, so we could have 4 things fermenting at a time. But we started this line called Dan's Jams, which like, again, I'm Dan. So it's kind of making fun of me, but I think, Jamie, you were a fan of the jams, right?
Oh, huge fan. They're my favorite.
Yeah, so it makes fun of like the fact that I wasn't a huge sour fan, and like also I'm a big Pearl Jam fan. Shout out Brian in Seattle, or Washington State anyway. But so I think we came out with the first one in April or May of 2020, and we just came out with our 40th version of the Dance Jam. So I mean, that'll give you a feel for like how often we come up with new stuff. It's just kind of all over the place.
Yeah. If you haven't tried Dan's Jams, like you gotta get some. Delicious.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So Brian, when did you decide to become a historian, and sort of how did you get into beer history specifically?
Well, I mean, I decided to be a historian before the beer kind of became the topic of study. Honestly, I got to graduate school around 2011. I went to Purdue, and I had stuff in mind for like what I wanted to study, and everyone does when they first get in, but a lot of people change topics, and I kind of realized mine wasn't going a place that I wanted it to, and so I started looking for something else, and that happened to be around the time a couple years into the program that I'm getting into craft beer as well. And at one point I'm kind of looking at the glass and be like, well, what happens if I look at the history of beer? And obviously there's been plenty written about it, but I also saw a lot of potential for what could be done, especially when you start looking at the cultural side. My particular research deals with ethnicity and politics and things like that. So once I started looking, I started finding more and more, and then I found fantastic people already doing that work, and I found even more fantastic people working in other ways in beer, everything from literally brewing to commentary and all that kind of stuff. And there was a community, and they had an interest in my work, and I had an interest in their work, and the more I did, the more it seemed to work out. Since kind of graduating and working on like my specific project, I've done museum work, I've done a lot of open events, I've started focusing on freelance writing in the during the pandemic and things like that, but it's just always been a kind of a fantastic journey.
I think this question of community is really interesting, and it relates to what Jamal was saying and Dan was saying, and this idea that the topic of beer, I mean, it's more than just a beverage, right? That this is something that it seems like it brings people together in a certain way. That when you talk about beer culture, like you're talking about, that there is something about the culture of beer and people who brew and enjoy beer, so I don't know, maybe for any of you, if you could sort of just talk about what exactly does that mean to you, and what is that community, what is that sort of beer I'm sure it's many things, but what are the things that beer culture can mean?
I think it's ever changing. I mean, you have culture of beer or beer history, like not all of that is like a lovely story to tell. You have like a lot of racism involved, you have a lot of sexism involved. But at the core, I think beer is somewhat, for the most part, I think, synonymous with a good time. Like my wife, so since I've been getting in, since I've gotten into the industry so deep, my wife naturally is now, joining me into like a lot of these events and beer spaces, to the point now where, as far as like consumption, she doesn't consume cocktails anymore, no wine, it's strictly beer. And then when we travel, most of the places we go to are breweries, and we hang out and we stay for hours, and we wind up meeting either the head brewers or the owners or just the patrons that are there, having a pint or whatever. So I think, as far as what that culture means to me, is like it's a very communal space, and it kind of like brings a lot of people together, whether they have different ideals or not. But it seems like everyone's kind of like brought to this place, and everyone is kind of like just dropping all the excess, just like biases and all that stuff. Now, this is not like like a heavenly atmosphere. I'm sure, they're part of my friends, they're assholes everywhere. But from my personal experiences, like I've always had great experiences in breweries. So that communal aspect is something that I look for. And the good thing about it is that it's always evolving. It's always being modified and changing.
Dan, do you see that in your tap room? And do you think that's something that survives COVID? I mean, I'm sure that was a challenge of the pandemic for all of us in all sorts of ways. But is that something, do you see people coming back, experiencing that kind of culture again?
Yeah, we're getting there. I mean, I would say like, people are people, right? There's good people and there's bad people all over the place. But you're hanging out in a tap room, you're at a bar. People are there to have a good time. So we're in a neighborhood bar like in North Baltimore, and we're part of the community. We put on charity events all the time. Just every kind of live music. We work with local artists. We do stuff for the neighbors and the neighborhoods, and we do. We really enjoy where we're at, and people are slowly coming back, but we're in a more conservative area of Baltimore, and people are careful, and so we're still Baltimore City's still under mask mandate, so we're doing the best we can, but we definitely see a community atmosphere in there. I walk in there and everyone knows who I am for some obvious reasons, because my name's on half the beers, but it's just, that's the kind of place we are, and we try to have fun with everybody.
To kind of build off both of that, I think one of the reasons beer is kind of distinctive in its historical value or its community value or things like that kind of goes back to what Jamal was saying about how it's not all rosy, and some of it is rosy. It's that complexity that really lends a lot to it. I mean, we talk about beer as we'll say like, oh, people across so many cultures and across so many swaths of human history have consumed beer, and that makes it important, things like that. But I mean, how many people across those same swaths of history have consumed, chicken or, carrots, and stuff like that. And what makes beer different is how contentious it can very easily be. A lot of people will say very kind of wrongly, keep politics out of beer, but, beer doesn't keep politics out of beer. And because it interconnects itself to so many broader historical trends about who we are and how we do and do not tolerate each other and things like that, it becomes this kind of nexus point where these things move in and out all the time, and breweries then become sites where those things move in and out all the time. That it makes it a really fantastic thing to talk about and to study and to work with.
So thinking about brew culture and beer culture, what is something about your job that you wish more people understood? Because I'm sure there's a lot of preconceived notions about like what a beer historian is or what a brewer does. And what is something that you wish more people understood about either the industry or your job specifically?
Who do we want to start? I guess I can go first. I don't know if I wish more people knew it, but I guess what I would say is just that it's still a business and you have to do all these little things that, you know, nobody wants to do. Like every job, every even dream job comes with things that, you know, you don't want to do, where I'm doing the books or, you know, paying taxes and all sorts of things. You know, taking out the trash, I'll do every little thing. So it's not all like complete glamour, but, you know, we try to hire people that can at least do those glamour jobs. You know, the brewers for the most part, they do, you know, they have a great time, but most people will tell you that brewing is like 95% cleaning. So I guess that's one of the things that you didn't realize, like that it's, you know, it can be fun, but it's a lot of hard work and a lot of things that aren't maybe necessarily fun.
You don't just drink beer all day? I had such a misconception.
Well, we probably all drink too much of it, but yeah.
I guess I'd say the same. Not that I'm a brewer, but you know, people often kind of make that joke too and tell me I'm a beer historian. Oh, you know, I wish I could drink beer all day. And I'm like, I look at old paper all day and try and write new paper the rest of the day, you know. So, you know, most of my days spent, you know, where if the sources were your computer screen, you know, I'd be like this, you know, all the time, looking real closely, trying to study some, you know, some cryptic, hastily written cursive word, you know, from 200 years ago, and it's not quite as glamorous as as people make it out to be. So.
Yeah, and I think I'm in the middle of both Brian and Dan. Like I homebrew a little bit, and I study beer history a little bit, and then I do like a lot of things in between, which I mean is pretty damn fun. But the crazy thing is like people assume that I drink beer all the time, all day. And I probably do more tasting of beer because I'm actually kind of like taking like really like nerding out on the flavors and carbonation and if it's true to form, whatever that means, or if I just, you know, like it or not. So I think I do more tasting more than I do just slamming, you know, 7, 8 beers in one setting. But yeah, there's, I mean, the beer industry is very broad, man. Like I think a lot of people just think of that one tangible object, that pint, but so much goes into it. Like Dan was saying, like, you know, you have to pay taxes on this stuff. And not only that, you have to, you know, some people have to source their own hops or, you know, what do you do with your spent grains? And like, it's like all these different things that come into play, man. It really is, keep throwing this word community out, like, and, you know, breweries really can sustain communities. You know, every kind of like every base is covered in this thing. So.
The spent grains that he mentions, that's funny. My in-laws have a farm out northwest of Baltimore, and so normally my father-in-law comes out and gets the grains and takes them and feeds them to his cattle. Well, him and my brother-in-law go out to Colorado and do elk hunt guides at this time of year, and they don't come back until December. So I have to drive all the grains out there like for like the next month. I do this every year. And it's terrible. I'm either like feeding the cows in the dark, which it might sound probably a whole lot more fun than it is, but it's more like cow excrement all over me and me trying to get them to not like step on me. Or like last night, I'm running a forklift in the dark and like I couldn't see anything. So yeah, that kind of stuff.
That is definitely a piece of brewing that had not occurred to me. So I want to follow up on Jamal was talking about tasting and sort of, you know, what the ideal beer might taste like or true to form or that sort of thing. So I'm interested in knowing, I think, Jamal, you said you like Imperial Stouts or that's what you had today. You know, what for each of you is maybe your favorite or favorite few kinds of beers and why that is that you like those particular ones?
Well, I'll go with the why question first. For me, and this is only for me, like I just think of the foods that I like to eat. So I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, part of the Gullah Geechee culture. And what that means is I grew up, Gullah Geechee culture is very closely tied to West Africa and the Caribbean. So it's a lot of stews, a lot of seafood, a lot of rice. And the food has a tendency to be a bit spicy. But the servings are very heavy. You know, you go home, anybody like an aunt's house in South Carolina, it's going to be 5 pounds of food piled up on that plate. So the beers that I normally gravitate to are, for the most part, malt forward beers with like full body, great mouthfeel. I'm a big fan of carbonation, and how all of those play together, in particular with the malt, because the food that I'm more accustomed to enjoying is a bit spicy. The malt has a tendency to kind of like cool that off a little bit. And I like malt forward beers as opposed to, high IBUs or hop forward beers or whatever. I can tolerate bitterness in beer, but it's like not necessarily my go-to. And again, like carbonation, like I just love a good full carbonated beer, doubles, quads, Dunkelweisses, which is probably one of my favorite beers that like you don't hear too many people talk about. So yeah, I normally start with whatever food that I like and then kind of go from there. But I'll consume everything. I'm in the industry. Like I'm not a huge fan. I'm not even gonna say not a huge fan. I don't like sours. But if I go to a brewery, out of respect for all the work that people like Dan do, I will purchase that sour and consume all of it. And in my heart, I will say that I won't like it, but I can appreciate the work that it takes to make that bad boy.
Is this about like what beers we like the most?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have a favorite style. I like beers that remind me of something, and sometimes that's very personal. Like certain beers out of New Glarus Brewing in Wisconsin, remind me of me first really getting to know beer and memories I had with it. Same with Three Floyds in Indiana and Metropolitan in Chicago. And if you can't tell, I'm from that area originally. In terms of styles, I love the fall, because Oktoberfest and fresh hop beers are just such kind of fantastic seasonal varieties. But at the end of the day, I like to have things that are well made and that kind of give me a sense of where they're coming from, whether it's the brewery's identity or the history involved in the style, things like that. I like beers that give a sense of connection. And I think a lot of people feel that way on a visceral level, even if they don't like sit and ponder it like someone like me might do. So. Yeah.
Dan, are the beers that you like to drink the same as the beers that you like to brew?
Well, that depends. Like, so I guess my favorite beer that we brew right now, at times is the Dance Jams, and like, so as a rule, no, like because I don't particularly like the sours, like Jamal said, and I think that's okay to not like a style. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, I can appreciate anything, all the styles, but I think it's okay not to like something. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. But yeah, I tend to gravitate toward like a Pilsner, when it's hot outside. And I like the IPAs. I know it's kind of cliche to be a beer guy, but that is what I like. But then I also like the Imperials. That's probably more like what Jamal's talking about. It just kind of depends. And I think you find people gravitating towards beer. Like, if I meet someone that says they're not into beer, if I can figure out like what they normally eat and drink, I think I can find like an introductory like beer that will get them there. So like Jamal's talking about like, maybe he drank more or like drank and ate more like savory foods, or, maybe he drank more sweet liquids when he was younger. And so like, these malt forward, like high ABV Imperials like are going to speak to him. And I kind of like it all. They all have their time and place.
What about you, Jamie?
Oh, put me on the spot now. I tend to gravitate towards stouts, not super sweet ones, but like more of a bitter stout. And I like the Marzen style a lot. So this time of year is really great because you get a lot of those coming out. But yeah, and I'm with Brian. I like the Oktoberfest kind of style. So but I like the more traditional, like the stuff that comes out of Germany, as opposed to some of the American takes on Oktoberfest. Sometimes they're too, I don't know. I don't even know what they are. It's just like, it's too much. What about you, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, I can like a few different styles. I do not like IPAs. I don't typically like things that are very hoppy. I like a good Pilsner if it's, hot summer day, that kind of thing. I tend to like wheat beers a lot. I'm in Chicago, so Goose Island 312 is kind of, my sweet spot. Um, and like an oatmeal stout. I like those kind of beers as well. I do drink more wine than beer, but I appreciate a good beer too, and the work that goes into it. My brother is a home brewer, and so I've sort of seen all of the like everything that goes into it, even to homebrew. So yeah.
So, what would you guys say is probably the most challenging aspect of your work, or the most challenging aspect of being in the industry?
Well, for me, I do more writing my job in the industry is as a writer. So, coming up with cool things to write about opposed to like beer review. Like at this point, like I refuse to do like beer reviews. I think that's a bit unfair and pretty one-sided. So and I don't even really consider that a downside of the industry. Like I actually look forward to that because it kind of makes that muscle work in the brain to kind of like figure out the thing. But just like on a recreational side, like I said, I home brew and I brew. I'm very good at brewing horrible beer as opposed to great beer, but I have hit my mark a few times. So like like the little ins and outs of that, like cooling your wort in time and like not letting anything funky get into it, and like Dan said, making sure everything is clean. Like I don't have all the technology to assist with that to 100%, but I try to do pretty well. And sometimes I fail at that. Sometimes I succeed. So yeah, it's like, I mean, honestly, it's nothing really for me in particular to complain about. Like I actually enjoy the people who I get to connect with and opportunities that I have and all the free beer that I get randomly a lot of times. So yeah, it's not too much to whine about.
For myself, again, I'm a historian. I'm not like in the brewing industry. I'm kind of just more adjacent to it. But that said, I think studying the history of beer is changing in terms of what's being done and who's doing it and things like that. And it's all very good changes. And I think that we are having to kind of fight kind of a stigma sandwich that we're stuck in, where on the one side, professional academic historians have not traditionally looked to beer a lot. And there are kind of stigmas around like whether or not we're doing serious work, that kind of stuff. And there's all sorts of politics in the academy that, we could spend the rest of this talking about if we want to bore everybody. On the other side, there is kind of the popular audience for beer history that had kind of calcified, I think, where there was either there was a subset of people who really liked it and loved to read as much as they could about it. And then there was a bunch of other people, basically everyone else, who was like, I don't want to see this again. Because a lot of beer history before more recent years had focused a lot on, the history of the business, like the corporate structures or the business structures, the tale of this brewery, when it was founded, who founded it, and what year it expanded, to add a new facility, and et cetera, et cetera. And then, what was historical styles of beer like? What did it taste like? What kind of grain went into it? All that kind of stuff. And that work is absolutely valuable, and it's still being done. But I think there's a whole new kind of arena opening up in terms of getting into this beer culture approach that doesn't always talk about the beer, that talks about the people, that talks about the historical forces, like the racism, sexism, classism, political action, all that kind of stuff, and much more. And so I feel like that has a lot of potential. And I feel like one thing I'm always struggling with, it's a good struggle, and it's something I'm very happy to do, but is kind of convincing people to come back and give us another chance, because we're not just talking about the board of directors and the corporate structure anymore. We're talking about the people that the beer affected and how it changed their lives. So
I guess it's my turn. I guess for me, like the biggest challenge that I deal with is just being a business owner and just all the headaches. You know, especially COVID has exacerbated like just financial constraints, and it's just hard. You know, because we stretched to do everything that that we did, and it's just very stressful. And there's always something popping up. Somebody quits, someone calls out. Like over the past couple of days, I've done like 7 job interviews for like a taproom GM, and so it's just difficult. Like, so we have a good time. I meet a lot of like, people that I would otherwise never meet, but and do a lot of really fun things. But at the same time, it's just the headaches are never ending. So maybe not as romantic of an answer as Brian and Jamal, but it's just tough.
So, Brian and Jamal, I wanted to ask you about this historical project that you're working on. If you could talk a little bit about what it is that you're looking at, and the kinds of research that you're doing.
okay, all right, I'll jump on the grenade. So anyway, Jamal and I, and then 2 other experts named Mike Stein and Peter Jones, who work out of Washington, D.C. We started researching the Charleston Schützenfest about a year ago. Actually, it's been a while, and we learned about it as this amazing, fascinating event in Charleston's history, where it was this German community shooting, like rifle shooting tournament that also had tons of beer in it, and that actually kind of became this this deliberate battleground over the role of Black participation in Charleston society and the power of white supremacy in the city and beyond. And so we wrote a 3-article series about it called Take Care to Root. Sorry, Jamal wrote the article series. We kind of supported, and that has since that is a whole fascinating tale. It took 3 articles to tell the story, and we still had to leave a bunch out. And once that happened, that started some conversations with people in Charleston, both brewery owners and other acquaintances of Jamal's that he can tell you about. And now we're using it to springboard into related projects about 18th century brewing and some of the earliest Black brewery workers that we know of in the city's history. And we're putting together a festival on it that's going to happen next week during Charleston Beer Week, and much more. Honestly, the person to ask about it is Jamal. I just kind of do research and throw it his way. So
yeah. So yeah, everything that Brian mentioned. So I was a little hesitant to jump on this project because at the beginning it seemed more of a history project, and Brian's the expert in that regard. The only connection I had to the story was that I'm a Charleston native, born and raised. So they kind of convinced me to jump to let me know that, hey, you can be good with this. Just tell your story. So that was like my way of seeing an end with it. So I basically just tried to parallel my story, how I grew up in Charleston, with whatever happened 150 years ago. And what that means is that I got into the beer industry fairly late. The contest that I mentioned earlier, I was like 36 years old or whatever. And I grew up, played football in high school, played football in college. And for a while, I thought, hey, I'm going to be a football player. And then football was no longer a thing. And I taught high school, taught kindergarten, all these different things that I did that I could do pretty well, but there was no like connection to it. There was no passion. And then this thing that's been under my nose the entire time, that being beer, like I just fell in love with it. It's like baseball cards with me. Like I just want to, like I said, I want to taste everything. Like I literally can't get enough of it. I think about it all the time. I talk about it all the time. So when it came to kind of like craft this piece, like about this, revolving this gun and beer festival. It was like, well, what does that mean to me? How am I connected to this? And I started making the connections of the exclusion that happened with African Americans during Reconstruction from this very beer-centered event that went on. That kind of connected with me because going to breweries or home brewing was never was a thought in my mind. And I don't know if that was necessarily, of course, obviously, a lot of that is on me, but also like that opportunity was never presented to me. Like you think about colleges, you have like a lot of different colleges that offer brewing and fermentation sciences as degrees. I graduated from an HBCU, Historically Black College and University. There's 137 of them in the US. None of them offer that as an option for in their curriculum. And so I started looking at things like that. And I just look at it like, specifically for Charleston, like that exclusion that happened, like that was it was a missed opportunity because the culture in Charleston is very different than any other Southern city because of the influence of West Africa and the Caribbean. The landscape is similar to West Africa, the cuisine, and most importantly, the dialect. You think of Southern dialect, you think of that one stereotypical twang. Well, in Charleston, it sounds completely different. It sounds more like someone is from the Caribbean, Jamaica, Guyana, all those places. So that was just like I said, that was my end. I just looked at it like a what could have been, or this is because that exclusion happened then. This is why I had to take the route that I had to take to find my passion in beer. So.
Go ahead, Jamie. I was just gonna say, I really want to go to Charleston now.
I love Charleston. So we had a question from the audience, Helen. So she has two questions. First is for Brian. She would be interested in hearing about the classism in beer and sort of what that looks like.
Sure. Well, beer has been used to basically enforce class divisions, especially through, liquor licensing laws, regulating who can consume what, when, and where, all that kind of stuff. Throughout North American history in particular, I say North American mainly because that's what I know the most about. I'm sure that there are obvious analogs in all sorts of cultures. But I mean, you go back to some of the earliest kind of colonial tavern laws, a lot of them were used to make sure that the right people were getting into taverns, and also that the right groups of people or certain groups of people weren't mixing or being allowed in at all. This could be especially true not just for women, but of course for women of color in colonial societies, where tavern licensing laws would be used to prevent them from being able to operate at all. Tavern operations or similar, whether you call it a public house or a grog house or things like that, would be used by women a lot of times as a source of income, especially if those women were not under the social care of a male at that time, obviously not condoning any of those practices. So, tavern licensing laws would be used to make sure that women had certain access or didn't have certain access to society. And that's just one example of so many from that era. Another good way to kind of talk about classism as it manifests in beer actually takes us to Germany in the 1840s. And I promise I won't give you a whole lecture, but just at that time in the 1840s, the production and price of beer was very heavily regulated by the government in Bavaria, and Germany as a whole nation didn't exist yet, so Bavaria was its own kingdom, and it was very heavily regulated. And it was done to the point where if you were in Munich, if you were a working class person in Munich in the mid 1840s, you had so little money, you made maybe 40 kreuzer a day. Kreuzer is just their unit of currency at the time, and every single beer you bought would be 15-ish% of your daily wage, every single beer, not just all of beer. And for a lot of those people, a beer was literally like one of their entire meals. They would have 1 to 2 beers a day. It was considered food, for better or worse. It would be like their entire lunch or something like that. And you have to spend 15% of your entire salary for that day on that one beer. And if you want another, you're up to a third of your wage on beer. And so go figure that the working class population was incredibly sensitive to price increases in beer in the city. And that led to threats of violence constantly. It led to actual violence in 1844. And it was, it absolutely wove itself into the fabric of how the government ran, how Munich society viewed itself and operated, and how different classes of the city viewed not only themselves, but the people around them. So, I mean, copy and paste that type of dynamic or that complexity into so many different situations and societies, throughout the Western world and beyond, that of course beer is a wonderful window into classism.
So she also had a question for Jamal. Do you have any knowledge or experience with non-European beer traditions?
Non-European beer traditions. Like, are we talking about like brewing ingredients or things like that?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I know that there's a lot of beer that comes out of Africa is brewed with sorghum, which is also like a gluten-free version of beer. I think maybe I've had literally like one beer brewed with sorghum in Charleston around this time of the Schützenfest that we're talking about, which is like during Reconstruction. A lot of the African Americans would brew persimmon beer. And I think, Brian, you may know more about this than I do. Like, I don't even know what persimmon is. I've never had that before. One of the guys who's like he's kind of like an uncle to me, who I interviewed for the project, Mr. Sammy, he owns a fishing company in Charleston, the first Black-owned fishing company in Charleston. And he told me about sassafras beer, which is like an old kind of thing, like the old folks would make. It's like, and this is like very low ABV. I don't even think it's at like 3%. So like, like something very low, but he would mention that like a lot of the old timers would brew that. And so, I mean, outside of that, like, yeah, that's the only thing that I have to my knowledge.
So, Dan, you were talking earlier about how difficult COVID, the pandemic, has been for small businesses. Can you talk a little bit about what all of us can do to help support small businesses?
I guess it's probably pretty simple and obvious, but I would say as much as you feel safe in doing so, get back out and go to these small businesses and, spend some dollars buying direct from these breweries, tip the staff, treat them well. They've been through a lot, arguing with people over masks and, all kinds of things. Like the staffs have been through so much. So, it's just kind of self-explanatory, but just as much as you can support small business and, go out to these actual breweries. You're going to get a better experience anyway. You're going to get a better product. It's going to be fresher. So, try to do that rather than going out to the store. I mean, support the store, but you can go out to the store, buy local there too.
So what would you guys say would be the number one tip, or what kind of advice would you give to somebody who wanted to enter into the industry or enter into like being a beer historian? What would you say to them?
Are you asking if like someone wants to go to like graduate school, like things like that, or?
Sure, yeah, like if they're interested in like pursuing beer history as like a career trajectory, or even a passion project.
Sure. I would say it's about getting to know people. So beer Twitter, it's a community on Twitter, people who talk about beer, think about beer, work in beer, all that kind of stuff. There's always running jokes about how toxic it is, and things like that. And, there's a little truth to that, but at the same time, it's a valuable tool to get to know people and to see who's doing other work out there. I would say for someone who's trying to get into this more, it's absolutely about not just reading what people have done, but also engaging with the people who've actually done that writing and done that research and things like that, my work has improved dramatically since I stopped trying to be the historian who, the historian that I was trained to be in graduate school, who's always a lone wolf, just doing, stellar work and all that kind of stuff. And when I started doing projects with groups, not just with Jamal, but with other people as well, my work improved dramatically. I've been able to think about beer history better. I've been able to engage it better. And obviously, I still rely on my training, in historical methods and things like that quite a bit. But it's not, it takes a village, not just to raise a child, but to create good history, I think. And beer history is no exception to that. So I'd say it's about talking to people. It's about engaging.
Yeah.
Jamal, what if people want to get into beer writing?
Well, but I would back up and say, just find your niche. Like anyone, again, like beer is not just that one tangible object. Like I think I was kind of like destined to kind of like be in this industry anyway. I think whatever it is that you're good at, whoever you are, and you know better than I do, I think you can find a space in this industry to do that. Brian's a historian. He didn't know he was going to be a historian when he first got into it, but he kind of found his niche and now he's here. So I think it's wide open. It's not just that tangible object. Like I didn't think I would be in this industry. I think my thing is I've always been like a communal guy. Like I've always had I've always been friendly with like a lot of different people, and like this is kind of funny, but like growing up, I've always had, not to make this a whole race thing, but I've always had tons of Black friends, always had tons of white friends, and I was always that guy that was just cool with everybody. And now I'm in the industry that for the most part, I'm like the only Black guy in like a lot of different spaces, but while I'm in it, like I don't really pay attention to that. Because I'm just kind of like doing what I always do. I'm just laughing, meeting people, hanging out, and then having conversations. Sometimes I have to step back and be like, oh wow, there aren't a whole lot of people of color here, or there aren't a lot of women here. Why is that? Then I have to go down that whole road, which at times it can be very draining, and I almost kind of hate to like always have to talk about that stuff. But those conversations should be had. But I'm saying all that to say that that's who I am. Like I've always had this thing to kind of like connect with people who don't necessarily look like me. And I enjoy that. And I actually look forward to doing that. So I always say like, whatever you wanted to do when you were 8 years old, do that. I'm sure you can find a space to do that in the industry.
Dan, what if people want to get into brewing beer? Is this a thing you'd recommend they get into?
Well, I mean, I would always recommend someone follow their dream, right? Because you're never, you're always going to wonder and say, well, I should have done this. So of course I would recommend it, but I would say it's also tough. So I would make sure that, you could be as funded as well as you possibly could be. The laws have become so much more friendly now than when Nick and I started. You can open up a tap room pretty much in most states, I think. I know most about Maryland, but what we run right now, you couldn't do when we opened. So, we could have a lot deeper conversation, but you had to only go through distribution back then. And, that's locked us into some like terrible, like very unfair laws that like go back to prohibition. And, so I would just recommend anyone that wants to get in, start small and make sure that you're out in like retail, like where you can like connect with your community, connect with your customer, make that better margin too, which is way better than distro. And, and then just grow a grassroots campaign, through that, and then grow. And that's what I would recommend.
Awesome. Well, we are coming up on an hour. So I think a final question for each of you would be, what is something that you would recommend to the audience, whether that be a book, a movie, an album, a beer? What's something you would recommend to our audience?
You guys are getting off easy. Last week or 2 weeks ago, she made people give 3 of these. So just one thing you got to recommend.
I would say pull up your Yelp app, find the closest brewery, go there and just drink, post up. And then that should probably kind of take you down a whole rabbit hole of all other things to go. But yeah, pull up the Yelp app, see which one's the closest to you, go to it, hang out, have a good time.
One thing I'd say, I'll give technically two. So I'm on Twitter a lot. That's where I operate the most in terms of social media. And there's so much on Twitter right now to make you sad about the world. And not that you don't have to pay attention to so many things, but one thing you can add to your feed so that not every single thing you see is sad are two accounts. One is called Hourly Wolves and the other is called Hourly Foxes. And all it is a picture of wonderful foxes and a picture of wonderful wolves. And I'm sure there's, similar accounts for other animals as well, whatever your fancy is. But, every now and then I really need to see something like that in between the rest of the world. So I'll recommend those.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Yeah, once again, I don't have as many as romantic or inspirational hourly wolves answers as Brian or whatever, or Jamal's answer. But obviously I would recommend you come to Full Tilt Brewing because I wouldn't be shameless at all. And then I heard that there was this book about pirates in the Chesapeake Bay. And so you probably should get that. But those are the only two things I know about. So yeah, do those things.
That book is good. I agree. That pirate book, you should definitely read that one. All right, Jamie, what do you recommend?
I'm going to recommend a food item because I have been eating these nonstop. They are milk chocolate sea salt and caramels. I got like 3 of these from Costco and I've already demolished 1 canister. So what about you, Kelly?
So I'm going to recommend something that my kids would recommend. And there is a series of books out called History Comics that is good. My kids are 7 and 10 and they both like them. So it's that sort of age range. And there's one on the Chicago Fire. We're, of course, in Chicago. So that's a big thing for them that they like reading about. There's one about the Challenger disaster, which, to me is like something that happened that was very emotional when I was a kid. But for them, it's like it's ancient history. We can read about it like history. But they've gotten really into these books. And so they're learning history. They're having fun. They love graphic novels. So if you have kids or nieces, nephews, whatever in that age range, I recommend History Comics.
Well, I just want to say thank you guys for joining us tonight. It was awesome. I definitely have learned a lot more about beer than I knew before. So hopefully everybody else feels the same way.
Yes, thank you.
So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank y'all. Appreciate it.
All
Yeah,
right.
thanks for having me on. Appreciate you all.
Thanks, guys. Well, to everyone, have a good evening. And we'll see you back here, I think, next week, right?
Yep.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.